All right, everyone, it is time to get into some Havoc Brothers along with the Disciples. Boy, this has taken a lot of work to work on Havoc Brothers. It's been a real goal for me this end of 2024 to get out not just the Havoc but the Dark Elf Raiders. I'm a little behind, but I'm also tidying up the Dark Elf Raiders. But I really these Havoc Brothers, like the Battle Brothers, have just taken a long time, and I've just given a lot of thought about these armies and how they should play. I'm going to look at all of them. So this is going to be a longer video. You can skip to the custom army that you care for, but I'm covering everything. I just want to. I feel like I've designed these armies together. I feel that I should talk about them together. So just skip to the. So if you have a specific army in mind, just keep that. Just sort of skip to it in the in the chapters. But yeah, I think I'm pretty satisfied as long as we're considering this a really rough first draft. I think it really helped out a lot like the Battle Brothers that I designed all these armies together. So I'm sort of looking at all the armies as I'm building each individual one. And we're going to get into that about where my design philosophy, because this was a lot harder than Battle Brothers. And I'll talk about some of the challenges and some of my solutions in what I'm trying to come up with the first draft, and we'll sort of go from there. I think like Battle Brothers, Havoc Brothers slash Disciples, and I wish they would just. Hopefully, in the retheming this next year, they'll just decide on a name. Is it Havoc? Is everyone becoming Disciples, or is everyone becoming brothers? Because it's Havoc Brothers, but the rest of them are Disciples. But basically, all the Havoc, Change, Lust, Plague, and everyone, these are probably the second most important armies to really for OPR to support and for them to be really good, because there's a lot of Chaos players from 40K, and luckily I think that a lot of um, the Havoc armies are better, but I still think some of them are pretty weak. And I think as well that I wanted to sort of tidy up and make some of the units that maybe aren't as played a little more viable. All right. So we'll get into that. Hey, just do all the YouTube stuff. Appreciate everyone's support. And yeah, I have a lot coming on. I know 2024 has been a lot about Grimdark Future. And that's because I've just done a lot of work on these custom armies. I wanted to try to get this first set of competitive redesigns out there. And like I said, I have Dark Elf Raiders coming soon. It's just, it's just holidays and everything. But let's just get into it. As always, we'll talk about the assumptions. These are the things that I always consider. One is just competing against effectively some other official or competitively balanced armies. So not only the custom armies, but also like armies like, I always think of like the measuring rod for me is sort of like Blessed Sisters to Orc Raiders, who I think are just two solid armies. I don't want these armies to be as good as like Alien Hives. I think that, Alien Hives have sort of been brought back. I think they're still the best army, but I don't think that they are oppressive like they used to be. But when I think about the power level on these armies, I'm always thinking about somewhere between a Blessed Sisters to an Orc Raiders, who I think are just two of the best armies of the game, two of the best designed armies in the game. I always think about like a 5 or 6 game GT. So, in other words, when I say that this army has to have basically in the tournament circuit, what we call is basically an all comers list. It's got to be good in multiple different scenarios. So I tend to avoid designing armies that are like sort of pigeonholed and hard countering. I want armies to bring an all-comer list. 3,000 points, I think, is just a good place where I think OPR sort of gets a little more balanced. And then no allies. All right, so let's go look at the criteria. I've talked about this in my tier list. You can view that as well. But I'll just run through this: flexibility or very strong playstyle. Raw efficiency, pistol or hybrid taxes. The army can have, what I always say this, an army can have some pistol and hybrid taxes in a good list, but they have to have other units that sort of balance that out for flexibility. So Just something to keep in mind. I think a good spell list, I've already talked about how I'm actually going to do a video soon about spells, and I think some people, a good spell list can just really, and now with the buffs to the level 3 spells, boy, spells are just back in the mix. I think Impactful Elites for that consistency, and then Cheap Chaff for just objective control. The upgrades, Advanced Tactics, AP4, Caster 3, Regeneration, Scout Ambush, and Warning Cry are all really great additions. And finally, always good in the army to have some sort of morale mitigation or just, be undead. Something like that is just very important. So let's talk about Havoc Brothers. Havoc Brothers, this is the original armies that I'll just cover. They're actually a really solid army, very flexible. They're pretty efficient. They have some units, but they really can run multiple ways and be pretty efficient. They've got a great spell list. I mean, that level 3, a lot like Battle Brothers, that, excuse me, that level 3 plus 3 AP on the charge is just so crazy good. Yeah, so Caster 3, they don't have regeneration. They have Scout and Ambush, but no Warning Cry. They also don't have, unlike Battle Brothers that have Fearless, they don't have a lot of morale mitigation. But they've got Quality 3 on the right units. It's they can sort of get it. Quality 3 armies can generally get away with it a little more. But yeah, I mean, they've got also some cheap chaff. They've had some new units added recently, like the Mutated Cultists, which I think are just a super solid addition to the lists. Yeah, Havoc Brothers are just an A tier army. They're just really solid. Change Disciples. They're a D tier army. I mean, they're not very flexible. The army-wide stealth is pretty bad. They don't have a good spell list. I mean, their spell list, I don't know if you've seen it. It's just, it's rough. Yeah, I mean, not really impactful elites. They've got some cheap chaff. They actually, advanced tech, they don't have easy access to AP4. They, like I said, they don't get a AP buff on their spells. They only can really sort of go the storm rifle, inefficient way of doing what they do with their destroyers. They do have Caster 3. They do have Regen. It's one of their spells. But it's definitely a very weak army. And I've had to really... This is an army that I've had to do the most work on. Just really fundamentally changing how the army's going to work. All right, Lust Disciples are about a C tier. Fast is a decent army-wide rule. They're pretty flexible. They just... they don't have the hitting power. They don't have AP4. I mean, trading out that +1, that +3 AP for +3 to hit on the level 3 is just really bad for them. They don't have regen. They're pretty squishy, and that's a really tough thing. To not have AP4 efficiently is just not good in the army. They're bad as C tier, but they're not as bad as Change. I mean, Fast, you can work with Fast. You can. Plague Disciples are just an A tier army. Very flexible. They've got things like zombies. So they have, every one of the Disciples have like their own custom, sort of like their own custom units. And they've got those Plague Zombies, which are just amazing. They're very efficient. They've got a great spell list. They've got both there. They've got access to that AP4. Remember, their Terminators can get that AP4 Deadly 3 upgrade on their weapons. Very good for their destroyers. They got regen in the army. That's an upgrade. That, when you combine that with Putrid, it's really solid. It's really solid just with Plague, that they can put regen and have the Putrid in the army. Just super solid. Yeah, I mean, they're just a solid army. War Disciples. War Disciples used to be I think maybe like a B tier-ish army, maybe a C tier. They had a lot of hybrid tax issues. But they've got spells, and their level 2 spell that is a counter on 2 units is just such a that spell alone probably brings them into A tier. And it's actually one of the few armies that you can get away with playing hybrid units, because they have just that on-demand counter that they can cast. So with War Disciples, you actually can run them decently shooty with like destroyers who can just walk up, shoot stuff, and then you charge them, and they're going to hit you first with Thunderhammer, with energy fists or with energy swords. They also have the +3 AP on the charge. That's just insane synergy with Furious. I mean, they're very solid, and I think that spell list that they got is one of the best. I think it's the best in the game, now that I think about it. Like a level 2, I don't know of any other official armies that actually have a level 2 counter, so it's pretty crazy. Yeah, they don't have regen, but they're just a very solid army. Very solid army. I probably in my design, I definitely take away that level 2 counter. That thing is just too good. Too good. All right, so that is the initial setting. As I've said, these are armies that a lot of them are A tier armies. So some of my redesigns are going to be a little more minor on some of them, where I'm just tweaking some of the hybrid units. Um, for War Disciples, a slight nerf by removing that level 2 counter. But I don't know. I think that's just too good. But a lot of the armies, so Change and Lust got a little bit more work to sort of get these armies a little more there. So let's talk about the custom army. So for one, with Havoc Brothers, one of the things that's been difficult to design these Havoc Brothers armies is that these army-wide special rules are very difficult to work in the armies. The nature of the units with things like cultists all the way to destroyers having the same special rule can just be very difficult to somehow manage. So there's a few things that I've done. One is that I've really changed the armies up to be very distinct from each other. And that means some of the armies don't have army-wide special rules. So that's the main thing. A lot of them just they don't. Some of the units are sort of more generic, like vehicles. I've the other thing is things like cultists. On a lot of the armies, I've just basically stripped the cultists down to basics. I think that, especially in some of the armies, some of the special rules on the cultists are really problematic. And I think I like the idea of cultists being a little more initiative, like sort of like initiates, where they don't have access to that special rule. But also for things like Lust and Change, it's sort of army-wide special rules just don't work in that. So that's the one thing I've done is I've really taken these armies and I've said not everything has to have the same army-wide special rule. I've just taken a point to just make some of these units more generic. I've tried to really add some unique upgrades and playstyles. Tried to make the spells very unique across the armies, although some of them do have similar spells. So that's that balancing act that I'm trying to play. All of these armies, I'm almost going to say, I'm going to think about in their alpha state. They all need testing, but I think all the work I put into this, I think all these armies are at a good first step. And I want to talk about Plague. Plague and redesign actually isn't mine, so I'm using. We'll get into that. I'm using another person's redesign for Plague, which I really like. So, with all that in mind, let's just get into each of these armies. All right, we are back into the armies. So let's just start out with Havoc Brothers. Here, I've published these armies. Like I said, it's the first of 2025. Took a lot of December and November and worked on these armies and just been tweaking them for the last several months. And I wanted 2024 to finish this, and so that's really pushed me to do this. And I like setting goals for myself. It lets me, not sort of procrastinate too long. All right, Havoc Brothers. Havoc Brothers, I felt were in a pretty good place. There's a few things that I did change in the army. For one, I did make them a little more similar to actually Battle Brothers. So they do have some similar upgrades, things like Blurred Sight. I've given them a Power Crush, that's a +1 impact. The other thing I've done is I've changed the level 3 on them to actually just be a level... So instead of just charging, they actually have +2 AP all the time when they fight in melee. That actually makes the units a little more flexible and actually to take more advantage of things like their pistols and their shooting weapons. I think this works a little better in the generic Havoc Brothers. So for generic Havoc Brothers, I'm actually thinking about older editions of 40K where they had the Veterans of the Long War upgrade on some of the generic Havoc Brothers. And so what I've done with the Havoc Brothers is actually I've just given a lot of their units a fearless upgrade. I think with Havoc Brothers, I want them to sort of be more of a stalwart, more of sort of the armies that are a little more tough. So giving an on-demand fearless upgrade on a lot of the units, I think is pretty cool. That is sort of their thing. Like, I think with Havoc Brothers, that's where I wanted to go with the army. I didn't want the army to be super specialized, but I wanted them to just be an all-around good army. And I think that Fearless and making them sort of, that's their thing. They're basically a little more, the morale is a little tougher on the army. So that's the big change I did with the army, is on a lot of effectively the brothers, I've given them an on-demand Fearless upgrade. One thing I didn't do is, again, for the cultists, I didn't give them the Fearless upgrade. One of the things that I'm trying to do is break apart this idea that cultists don't have access to the same army-wide rules and upgrades that the Marines or the Battle Brothers do. So the cultists don't have that upgrade. So for instance, here in these cultists, they don't get access to that on-demand Fearless upgrade. So these guys, a lot of these guys stayed very similar to the original ones here. Like I said, I did switch out some of the limited for the assault pistol just to help out with a little of the hybrid attacks. And just, again, a lot of the brothers, they get the Fearless. I think that the Havoc Brothers, to me, I didn't think the army needed a lot of change, but I like this. This is where I sort of fell into the army, which is that let's give these guys a little more morale mitigation than the other Havoc Brothers. So all the Havoc Brothers and all these ones, they're not as strong on morale. They just have one morale buff, and that's going to be on the champion that they have to choose. So their morale isn't as strong as Battle Brothers, but it's sort of like Havoc Brothers, the generic ones, are a little tougher on the morale. I think as well, this army is just still great. An on-demand Fearless upgrade's really solid on the army. I didn't change this army a lot. And also, by the way, in some of these, like the mutated brothers, I didn't give them the upgrade. I sort of felt that the mutated versions of the brothers, like, my thought is that the mutation is sort of not allowing them to have this Fearless stoicism. So that's where I'm sort of goes, is that I think about the Havoc Brothers as a little more like the Iron Warriors, a little more of a stoic. So that's something I did as well, is that I wanted the mutated versions and the Daemon spawned versions to not have access to this, right? So just keep that in mind, that, like I said, a lot of these mutated destroyers I didn't, but for the Infernal Brute I did. So there's little things here and there that I did on the APCs. One thing Havoc Brothers, I want their vehicles, they have that little more strength, so I did give them a Fearless upgrade on their vehicles as well. Yeah, just keep that in mind. Yeah, just but like on the Infernal Stalker and like the Fiend, I'm treating these a little more almost like so some of these things like the Fiends and the Spider Walkers and the Tanks and the Crab Walkers, I'm treating these a little more like almost mercenaries, where again, I'm not trying to feel constrained. The moment, like I said, what took me so long in developing these armies is that trying to deal with the universal special rules. And I think the moment that I just said, not everything has to have a universal special rule, all of a sudden makes these armies, I think, become a lot more interesting. So that's the Havoc Brothers. It's a small change, but I think it's so it's just just making some small changes, like for instance giving these guys a short range assault shotguns. I did this with the other Battle Brothers, but again, just giving them a little Fearless upgrade as well, and then just tweaking their spells. All right, let's get into the Change Brothers. Change Disciples probably took the most work. This army, I really spent the most time thinking about this army because I think it's probably the worst of the Battle Brothers. Stealth is an army-wide rule. It's just really bad on the army. The first thing I had to do is I had to address the spells. The Change Disciples just had terrible spells, so I've switched them. They're a lot more of a defensive spell army now, where they have a regeneration. They've also got a slow, which is a little bit more of a defensive debuff, right? Where it's like you're just sort of slowing the enemy down. And then I've also got a +2 defense. So one of the things, I wanted their spells to be very defensive, and I wanted their spells to sort of support their shooting playstyle, right? I still think this army would want to play a little more shooty, so I think the slow on them is really solid. So what am I doing with this army? Well, one, I'm turning this army as much as I can. I want this army to be a very spellcaster heavy army. That's really where I was going with this army. Spellcasters. So one of the things that's unique to this army is actually their champions, unlike a lot of the other Battle Brothers and Havocs, can actually get a level 3 caster. So you can actually run your destroyer champion and your change champion as a caster, I need to remove this fearless. That's not there. That's some of these things I've tweaked. So this fearless upgrade is not supposed to be on there. But one of the change disciples is I give them a level 3 caster. But what about the change mage? Well, with the change mage, he's a level 3 base, and actually he can go up to a level 4. So I really want these guys to just be better at casting spells than everyone else. So their mages can actually get up to a level 4. For the cultist, so remember all the other cultists, the Havoc Brothers, they only get a level 2 caster, but their cultist can get a caster 3. So that's one thing I tweaked in the army, is that I've bumped up the casters to be a lot more available to the army. For the Harbinger of Change, again, just going up to a level 4. I've also given them some of these hex shots, which I think were good in the army. I've basically added a lot more of the hex shots in the army. This is in the original army, but I've made this shot a lot more available, and we'll get into that as well. So I've replaced some of the special rules with this, and what I went with is Spell Warden. I think that if we want this army to play very spell heavy, a lot of their default spells on some of their units, as I said, some of them are going to have this +1 to hit. So this is turning this army into a very powerful spell heavy. I've also actually just given them a caster 1. Change Brothers can do a lot of shenanigans. You can get the caster with the Spell Warden as well. This unit can really do a lot. The Hexed Rifle, I think, is a solid upgrade for them. This is already there. I've also given them a Hex Shot as another option. I think that's really cool. And I've given them a Hex Staff as well. And we'll get into this with the Destroyers as well. For the Change Cultists, I've wanted these guys. I'm sorry, it's not supposed to have an upgrade there. But yeah, they've just got the Spell Warden upgrade to sort of help out. I didn't give it to the Mutated Cultists. So let's just go back into that. Is that actually this is supposed to be removed, so they're not supposed to get Spell Warden. For the Change Birdmen, they also get Spell Warden, and actually this is their source of Warning Cry as well. So every army has a Warning Cry. Most of the Havoc Brothers are on their Bikers. So just to show you real fast, I did put Warning Cry in the army. I've made it a little less frequent, but I did give the Warning Cry on most of the Bikers. But for Change, again, trying to make them more distinct, the Birdmen actually get the Warning Cry. But the Birdmen also get the Spell Warden, and I put that on the Birdmen as well, who also get the Warning Cry. I've also given them a smaller Hex Shot as well. So they come with the bow, but they can also get a Hex Shot as well. Given them as well, they come with an Aerial, I've just given them an Impact 1 so they can actually fight up to their tough. Yeah, just some things. So that's where I'm going. I'm trying to go these a little more spellcaster. Then the Change Destroyers, I give them just Psychic Host. I want these guys to be really, really the linchpin of the army, where you have these destroyers that are going over these Psychic Hosts. I've tweaked some of their weapons so that they actually now can get this, in the old one, they had one guy that could get a Hex Shot. I've just given them all, so they all can get Hex Shots and a Hex Staff. So a really short-ranged shooting army if you want to run them that way. You can also still run them on an Assault Shotgun or Twin Heavy Pistols, but I really think that the Change Destroyers can sort of be a linchpin in the army. They've got the Psychic Host, they can have the Hex Shot, and they can do a lot of work in here. Yeah, sorry. Some of these things, this is supposed to be removed as well. They just come with Psychic Host by default. I think that's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. So a lot of their spells also, the reason that I also went with some of the spells I went with is to actually make their spells very cheap. So they don't have like a super powerful +3 AP or anything crazy. A lot of their spells are very defensive. They're meant to support the army, and they're meant to sort of slow down the enemy so they can sort of shoot them. I think Change as well is just really solid. So again, Change support, they get the Spell Warden. Change Bikers also get the Spell Warden. So I've really wanted to make this army live and die on casting. So that's the reason that they just get some of these. But you'll notice that some of the mutated versions don't get the Spell Warden. So again, I've tried to make it distinct. I've wanted the mutated versions of a lot of these units to be just not have that same synergy. Again, I don't feel tied down to the fact that I don't feel that everyone has to have has to have that. The Change Vortex Beast I've buffed up a little bit. One of the things I've done is I've tried to make some of their big beasts, including the Havoc Brothers, a little more efficient. So I've just pulled out the Heavy Claw as an optional upgrade, and actually just given it an optional Daemon Burst as well, so that it actually is fighting above it's blasting above its toughness at 15. So just again tweaking some of it so that this thing now is a little more shooty focused, and just made the Heavy Claw optional. Yeah, some of their big guys, I have just in general tried to make them feel a little more efficient here. Yeah, and that's just the crab walker I tweaked as well, but you can just sort of see here. For instance, the crab walker, I've just pulled out some of the flails as just optional upgrades, and again, I made the flails be able to actually just be shooting, so this thing could just be an actual just shooting thing. The crab walker especially, I think, needed some work in that I really wanted this thing to just either be primarily a shooting weapon, so you can switch out these flails for just, more DACA. All right, so the Change Disciples took the most work, like I said, and I've been working. So some of these there's some minor mistakes here. I'll be removing the Fearless upgrade for here, but just wanted to get this out and get this in front of the community. All right, the Lust Disciples. Lust also took a good bit of work. So one of the things I did is I did keep them with the impact and the -1 to shoot, but I just went ahead and just gave them the +3 charge. So a lot of the Havoc Brothers now have the +2 AP on just in combat, right? So that's where I switched it up for a lot of the generic Havoc Brothers. But for the Lust, I actually put the +3 AP on them. That actually makes these Lust are now, I think, a really crazy good army with that +3 AP. A lot of them do come with fast. So you can see again, the Brothers versions of these guys do come with fast here. Kept these guys again. I'm going to remove the Fearless upgrade. That's not supposed to be on there as well. So the Champion as well, just getting that fast as well. And yeah, the Havoc Mages are now they are back to the caster 2 with the 3, right? It's just Change that can go the 3/4 with casting as well. And one thing you'll notice here is that in the Cultist on these guys, they don't have fast. And this is something where I'm really looking into is I don't feel that every one of the everyone in the army can play different. Certain cultists can have special abilities in one army, and other armies, their cultists are just basic. And I think that's okay. I really have just sort of accepted that when we do go at this manner, we find that the armies can just flow a lot better. For Lust Brothers, I actually made, the noise rifles I think are super solid in the army. So they can now get noise rifles, but I actually have given them an upgrade, which is a heavy noise rifle here, where it's like 4 attacks. So these guys can actually push out a lot of shots here with Lust, and I think the 18-inch range works very well with fast. For the Lust Talon Wrappers, I've given them Overload. I want to try this out, actually. Maybe this is too powerful, but I am trying to put Overload possibly on them. This may be too powerful, so I'm keeping it in for now, but I did give the Lust Talon Wrappers an optional Overload upgrade. Is it too much? Not sure, but just, I'm trying some different things. The Lust Destroyers, so for one... so for the Lust Brothers as well, I've actually given them a Screech. So for their assault weapons, not only do they have an assault pistol, but actually when they go for their pistol close combat versions, I've given them a Screech, which I think is a little more going back to like this noise. And I think this is a really cool one. It ignores cover 6 inches. It actually is, I think this army could actually play that balance where it's fast, so it's a hand-to-hand army, but also it can play with a little bit of that close-range shooting. So I like the Screech upgrade. Actually, for the Destroyers, I just give them a Screech. So these guys are just coming with a Screech, which I think is really cool. It feels like in the army, I just imagine like the Screech it kind of feels the way it should. For these guys, they actually can all get heavy noise rifles at 4 attacks. So this is for these Destroyers with this fast and this 18-inch range, this is actually a truckload of shots that you can just pump out into these destroyers here. Really like that as well. Again, these are all heavy noise rifles. So I really like where Lust is going. For Lust support, I did change things. If you're going to give them fast, instead of giving them relentless, actually just give them devout. And yeah, it could, just so you know, of course, we could change this to their own version of the name, but it would be a rule that's just basically devout or a changed name on it rule. So for these guys, this actually works. This makes Lust support a lot more unique in that they can actually play the move and shoot game. I think that fast and relentless just doesn't fit as two rules, so I like giving them a rule like devout where they explode on sixes. Still allows them to move. Actually really helps the flamers and the heavy fusion rifles. Again, making the army work with fast. Lust Bikers do come with very fast, and again, they come with these noise amplifiers, which I think are just super solid. Like, I would love to see the kit bashing where these bikers are running around and they have like megaphones where they just run up point blank range and just like scream at people. So I really like that. Lust actually, to me, I think really looks cool. And I love just the noise amplifiers, the close range shooting. But also, a lot of their shooting doesn't have a lot of AP. It's sort of, so for these guys, they're beating people through volume of fire, right? Ignores cover may not, but with a lot of 2 and 4 attacks, you're basically just beating people through volume of fire. So you still need to sort of bring in some heavy hitters as well. Yeah, Lust Mutated Brothers. I did go ahead and knock them up to very fast. So like I said, just so you know, what I'm doing is I'm okay changing the armies and not sort of following the same. I don't think that you have to follow the same rules for all the units. So in this one, I did give them very fast. I think that's fine. Greater Mutated as well, give them very fast. I did actually give them a Daemon spawn. I feel that Lust should just have a Daemon spawn. I don't know. I just feel they should have a Daemon spawn. Yeah. The Mutated Destroyer as well. Yeah, and so would give this guy fast as well. I think I need to tweak that as well. And then, but also just some of the tanks and stuff, the crab walkers, they're just generic. It's just a generic Infernal Brute. Again, for me, I don't feel it necessary to always make like a Lust Fiend. I think it can just be a Fiend in a crab walker. So that is another option that I'm making where I'm okay with the armies being a little more sort of disparate and a little more hodgepodgey. I feel that way. And so that's where I'm going right now. Obviously speaking, these are first drafts on the arm, but I really like where Lust ended up. I love the idea of them having that. I went back and forth this army. I wanted to put Overload on more units, but I thought that was too powerful. And maybe Overload is too powerful on the Lust Raptors. I don't know. Keep it in and maybe I change it out. It's things that I'm trying. And in my previous versions of these armies, I have made things that are too powerful and then I've just dialed them back. And I'm okay with that. And I think that's a great thing. So for Plague Disciples, this is actually, they're calling them Blight Disciples, which is the right design. So this is one of the guys on the forum, really did a lot of work on this army. And I think it's really cool what he is doing. He did some minor changes. And I want to go into this army because I think what he's doing is pretty cool here. So one, he's putting a lot of his morale mitigations into his spells. -2, and then a +1 morale here. And then he's also got the slow. So this army, he's actually got 2. He's got the +3 defense and the slow. He's trying this army is trying different things. I like where their spells are going, where they're focused on one thing. Right, this army already has some pretty high AP, and I like that with an army that has a lot of poison in it. He changed it. Now, one of the things that I think he did, which I like, is that he sort of moved away from poison, and he moved a little more towards reap, which I like in the army. I think that poison with high AP is a little problematic, so I do like that he's moved a little more towards the reap side. I think it's really cool. So one of the things that he's done, and again, you'll notice here, he's broken up some of his upgrades. Not everyone has the same upgrade. So for one, he's got this thing called Unwavering. This Unwavering is basically a minus one AP. And he has this one, and then he's also given an optional Putrid, as well as a Corrosive as well. He's putting in some really cool upgrades. One of the things I think this army can be really cool is that he's actually stacking 2 defensive upgrades. He's got the Unwavering and he's got the Putrid. To me, this army feels really like a Blight Plague tough army with 2 upgrades. I think it's got a lot going on here that I like. I like the spells. I like where he's going, whether it's the +2 defense or AP. Like I said, I'm okay. This is an alpha list. He's trying different things. I think the lock joint is, for me, a little better. +2 defense may be getting a little too much, but then again, I don't know. I go back and forth about it. But I like what he's doing with this army, where he has the Unwavering as a base for some of them, and he's given them an optional Putrid as well. He's also just given some additional further ones here. He's got this Chilling Aura. We can give him -1s to hit. So he's got a lot of his big overlords he can actually do some different things with. Yeah, and he's got a 15. Like I said, he's adding in some extra units. He's doing a lot with it. Just getting into the Blight Cult Leader again. He's running the Unwavering on these guys, which I like. I like how he's put Putrid on the Blightlings, but on the Cultist, he's got Unwavering. I think Unwavering works a little better on the Cultists. Yeah, and just he's also can put mutation, so he's merged in the mutated Cultists with the Cultists. I think that's fine. He's got Corrosive on the Cultists, so he's really adding in some really unique upgrades. He's got the Blight Walkers as well. He can add Corrosive on, but he doesn't give Unwavering onto them. So again, I like that he's mix and matching. That's great. He's got the Blight Brothers that he's running with these Blight Rifles. So these guys can get pretty pricey, but I mean, that's pretty good. So he's moving away from the standard armament, and he's really moving towards something I think a little more unique. He's changing some of the spells where he's adding a lot more of the Reap on here. He's making this army his own, and I think that is where I would love the Havoc Brothers in general to go, where the armies really begin to feel very distinct from one another. Yeah, a lot of this is go check out the army as well, but I really like where he's added his own versions of some of these unique weapons. Like I said, he's put Reap on some of these. I love his Blight rifles, which are here. These are really cool here, right here. I love these too. Some of this army actually inspired me. I took a lot of inspiration from this army with the Lust and the Change, because I felt this army, it's really moving away from just, it's very distinct now. It has its own thing going on that I really like. Yeah, go check out the army as well. It's just, he's added in some new units, just a very solid army. Like I said, I love the double stacking of defensive upgrades. It just sort of makes the army work. So go check it out. I think it's great. All right, so for War Disciples, again, I think this is an army that it just needed a little bit of love and a little bit of tweaks, and I think this army is still super solid. So these guys already come with some pretty high AP. So actually I went with the -2 defense for Melt Armor. I actually love this Fury here. This level 1 that can give 2 units Furious. They already have Furious. Now they're exploding on 5s and 6s. Just a really solid level 1. Another thing that I've given the army is actually this Unstoppable. I like the idea of giving Strider in this army. Making this army, this army is going to be in your face. So I think Strider as a spell upgrade, so that all those close combat units can just ignore terrain when they need to. It's just really solid in the army. Again, I don't think this army needs their spells. I feel this really works with the -2 armor, and then the Furious, this army I see really living and dying when using the level 1s and 2s. And then just when they really need it, they've got this level 3. So just going into the War Destroyer, again, I didn't change a lot. I did change the spot. I felt the level 2 counter was just a little too crazy. Again, but so in this army, I did go ahead and give Furious some of the well, so for here, for instance, the War Cultist Berserkers are changed. So they actually get their frenzy instead, which I think is cool. But like the cultists, they don't get furious. Maybe I added in, maybe I don't. I don't know. I'm trying it like this. It's just something to keep in mind. I'm looking at it as well. The mutated cultists, for instance, don't get furious as well, but maybe I'll change it. For the War Brothers as well. So one of the things I did is I wanted these guys to first of all, these guys, they do get the Furies, right? For the War Destroyers, I've tweaked it so that they can actually get a little more different upgrades. I've added the Great Weapon. That's it. So just giving these guys, instead of running the Rending, they can actually just run the AP2 for them. And then, again, the War Mutated Brothers. So some of these guys I did, for instance, the Mutated, I did actually give the Furious. And I think that's okay. And I did give the War Berserkers, so I actually gave them a Great Weapon for all of them. I think this is coming here really solid just to get these AP2s as well as was Frenzy. So a lot of their AP is actually in that 2 to 3 range. Some of them have Frenzy. I think the army still is really solid. I think, especially with the Strider upgrade, one of the problems I think I had with the original version of the War Disciples is they actually sort of play defensive because they've got that counter, and then it didn't feel like the army, right? Like they're playing with counter, but they don't have a lot of Strider in the army. So with this one, this army is to me really maximizing. I think you bringing casters and you've got this Strider, this on-demand Strider in the army. So this army is really an in-your-face army now, but also has some decent shooting as well. I really like War came out. It was a little more tweaks. So yeah, I'm not going to build armies for each of these. This video is already going pretty long, but so these are the 5 Havoc redesigns as well. These are all alphas. As you saw already in some of these armies, I've got some mistakes. For instance, I'll go ahead and tweak this today, but none of the armies other than the Havoc Brothers are supposed to get a Fearless upgrade. So I'll have to remove that. And yeah, let me know what you think. I'm going to be testing these armies out. I'm excited for all of these armies. I really want to test out Change. I may put them against each other. I would love to see how Change does against War. For me, that's what I go for. I like to build armies that I feel excited about. And for now, I feel pretty excited about all these armies. I will admit some of them may be a little too powerful. But I think that's okay. I think, we can always dial down the power level. All right, well, that has been a long video. Would love to get feedback on these. Like, subscribe, and comment. Hey, send me your custom armies. It takes me a little longer sometimes, but if you go onto our Discord, I'll review your custom army, and I'll give you my honest thoughts on it. So thanks, everyone.